She wasn't someone most people noticed. Every day she wore the same plain uniform, tied her hair back the same way, and smiled politely as she poured coffee and served food at the small diner in town. She moved from table to table quietly, always with gentle eyes and careful steps. No one really asked her name. To most, she was just the waitress. But after her shift ended, her real world began. In a tiny apartment above a laundromat, she had something no one else saw: old keyboard. The keys were yellowed with age, and some of them stuck when she played too fast, but she loved it. Night, after wiping off the day's stress, she sat down on a wobbly wooden chair and let her fingers dance over the keys. It wasn't about perfection. It was about peace. When she played, the world slowed down. All the noise, all the tiredness from hours of standing and smiling, faded away with every note. She had never taken lessons. No fancy schools, no music teachers. Everything she knew came from really listening to the world around her. The sound of rain on her windows, the hum of the diner's fridge, the wind pushing against the glass. These became part of her music. She played what she felt, not what she was told. But this secret life stayed hidden. She never told anyone. At work, what would they say? A waitress who plays piano. Most of them barely looked her in the eye, let alone cared about what she did after hours. The diner where she worked had a dusty upright piano sitting in the corner. Nobody touched it. It was more like decoration than an instrument. The keys were chipped, and it was badly out of tune. But sometimes, when the diner was empty, she'd glance at it and wonder how it might sound if she gave it life again. One rainy afternoon, the diner was quiet. Only a few customers sat at their tables, lost in their phones or their coffee. A young cook behind the counter, just trying to pass time, said jokingly, "Why don't you play us something?" He nodded toward the old piano. At first she laughed. "It off, no one wants to hear that," she said. But he kept pushing. "Come on, just one song. What's the worst that could happen?" With a hesitant smile and shaky hands, she slowly walked over to the piano. It felt strange to sit there, in front of others. She placed her fingers gently on the keys and started to play a soft, slow tune, one she had made up during a sleepless night. At first, no one paid attention. Then someone in the corner laughed. Another person whispered something with a smirk. A woman near the window raised an eyebrow and shook her head. One man even said, loud enough for her to hear, "Stick to serving tables, sweetheart." She stopped playing. Her fingers froze. Her face burned. She stood up quickly, muttered a quiet sorry, and went back behind the counter. No one clapped. No one said anything kind. The moment passed and people returned to their food. That night she didn't touch her keyboard. It sat there in silence while she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Maybe she had been foolish. Maybe music wasn't meant for someone like her. The world had made it clear. Waitresses don't play pianos. But somewhere deep inside, the music was still there, waiting. Days passed, and she kept her head down. She moved through her shifts quietly, trying to avoid attention. She didn't go near the piano again. Even when the diner was empty and her fingers itched to play, she reminded herself of the laughter, the whispers, and that one sentence that had cut deeper than she'd expected: stick to serving tables. It wasn't that she believed that, man, but it hurt. No one knew how much music meant to her. To them, she was just the girl who brought their food. Then one night, something unexpected happened. It was late. Rain tapped softly against the windows. Only one customer sat near the back, an older man with silver hair and tired eyes. He wore a long coat, and his hands were slightly shaky as he held his cup of coffee. He had come in quietly, ordered politely, and hadn't said much. She served him and walked away. But after she filled his cup for the second time, he spoke. "Is that piano ever used?" She looked at him, surprised. "Not really," she said. "It's just there." He nodded. Slowly, eyes still on the keys in the corner. "Do you know how to play?" Her heart jumped a little. She hesitated, then gave a small nod. "A little," she replied. He looked at her kindly. "I'd like to hear." She smiled awkwardly. "It's nothing special, just something I do when I'm alone." "I'm still listening," he said gently. There was something in his tone. not like the cook's teasing or the customer's cold remarks. This man seemed genuine, quiet, kind. For a moment she stood frozen, debating whether to say no. But something inside her softened. She looked around. The diner was empty except for him and the night shift cook in the back scrolling on his phone, so she walked toward the piano again. This time, her hands were still nervous, but she didn't feel ashamed. She pressed the first note, then the next. Slowly the tune began to form, the same one she had started before, but this time with more care, more feeling. Her fingers moved like they were telling a story. One only she understood. She didn't look up, didn't listen for reactions. She just played. When the last note faded, the diner felt quieter than before. The old man clapped softly. He said, "Was beautiful." She looked at him, unsure what to say. No one had ever said that to her, not about her music. He smiled and added, "You don't just play, you speak through it. That's rare." She sat there quietly, unsure how. To respond, he asked if she'd ever performed. She shook her head. No training, no audience, no stage. Just the old keyboard at home and that worn-out piano in the corner. The man introduced himself as a retired music teacher. He said he'd taught students for over 30 years and that her playing had more heart than many trained musicians he'd worked with before leaving. He placed a folded paper on the table. "There's a small music festival happening next month," he said. "They take amateur performers. Think about it." She opened the paper after he left. It was a flyer, simple and clean. Local sounds. A night of new voices. There was a phone number and a deadline to register. She stared at it for a long time that night. She sat at her keyboard again. Her fingers were shaky, but the melody came back stronger than ever. No doubt still whispered in her ear. Something new was growing quietly beside it. Hope. After that night, everything felt a little different. The flyer stayed folded in her bag, but she read it again and again during breaks at the diner. She didn't tell anyone, not the cook, not the other servers. It felt like a fragile dream, something that might disappear if she said it out loud. The music festival was just a month away. It wasn't anything huge, just a local event in a nearby town. But to her, it felt massive. Performing in front of strangers, on a real stage, the thought alone made her heart race. Still, something inside her had shifted. The old man's words kept echoing in her mind. "You don't just play, you speak through it." She began practicing every night with a new kind of focus. She dusted off the melody she had written long ago, one she had never finished. It didn't even have a name. She had created it during one of her lowest nights, where she felt invisible and tired of the world not seeing who she really was. Now, she started to shape it, polish it, and build it piece by piece. At the diner, her routine stayed the same. Same uniform, same coffee pots, same tired customers. But now, her mind was always halfway at the keys. While clearing tables, she'd hum parts of the melody. While walking home, she'd imagine the sound of a perfect note. The music lived with her like a quiet shadow. Some nights she doubted herself. What if I mess up? What if I freeze? What if no one claps again? The voice of the man from the diner, the one who had mocked her still, lingered in her memory. Those words hurt more than she wanted to admit. But every time she sat down at her keyboard, her doubt got a little quieter, music spoke louder. One evening, the old man came back to the diner. She wasn't sure if he would, but he did. Same table, same gentle smile. She poured his coffee and smiled back. He asked, "Did you decide yet?" She looked around, made sure no one was listening, then nodded slowly, thinking about it. He seemed pleased. "Just remember," he said softly, "you don't need to be perfect, you just need to be honest." That sentence stayed with her. She wasn't playing to impress anyone. She wasn't trying to be famous. She just wanted to share what was inside her. One night, after almost 2 weeks of hesitation, she finally filled out the application. She typed in her name with shaky fingers. She listed the piece as original composition, untitled. Then, she clicked submit. It was done. There was no turning back now. After that, her nights became longer. She practiced until her fingers ached. Her neighbors could sometimes hear the music through the walls, but no one complained. Some nights, she even saw a soft light flicker from the apartment next door, someone quietly listening. But with practice came fear. What if her music wasn't enough? What if the audience didn't feel anything? Still, she kept going. She played the same notes over and over until they felt like part of her heartbeat. She wrote down little changes, rewrote entire parts, then went back to the way they were. Her tiny keyboard became her world. It didn't matter that it was old and missing a few keys. She made it work. She wasn't the same girl who had once run from the piano in that diner. Something had started to grow inside her, a small, steady flame, and even though fear was still there, she had decided one thing for sure. She would show up. She would play, no matter what. The days passed quickly. The music festival was now just a week away. Her heart beat faster every time she thought about it. This wasn't like playing in her room after a long day. This was real. This was public. People would be watching, listening, judging. She had never stood on a stage before. Still, she practiced every evening. She would come home tired, feet aching, but she'd sit down at her keyboard without thinking twice. Her hands were getting used to the movements, and she knew each note like it was part of her. But some nights, the fear returned. She would close her eyes and imagine walking on stage, and suddenly her chest would feel tight. What if she forgot the notes? What if her hands shook too much? What if no one clapped? One night, after messing up the same part 3 times in a row, she put her hands in her lap and sighed. Her small apartment felt quiet. The keyboard, once her friend, now stared back at her. Why am I doing this? But then she remembered how she felt when the old man in the diner had truly listened, how he didn't laugh, how his eyes showed respect, not pity. That moment gave her strength. She looked at her reflection in the dark window. She wasn't fancy. She wasn't trained. But she was real. Her music came from a place no one could see. And maybe that was enough. On her last day at work before the event, she moved like a ghost serving food, cleaning tables, smiling when needed, but lost. In her thoughts, the piano in the corner caught her eye more than once, but she didn't go near it. She didn't need to prove anything there anymore. As her shift ended, the cook behind the counter asked, "You okay? You've been quiet all day." She simply nodded, just tired. She didn't want to explain. Some dreams are better protected in silence. That night she laid out her clothes on the bed. Nothing special, just a neat black dress and a simple pair of shoes. But to her, it felt like a costume for another version of herself, one that people hadn't met yet. The next morning, she woke early. Her stomach felt heavy. Her hands were cold, but she kept moving. Brushed her hair, packed a small bottle of water, took deep breaths. The event was held in a small community hall. As she walked in, she saw others getting ready, young musicians in sharp outfits, some chatting confidently, others warming up with instruments. She felt out of place, like she had entered a world that didn't belong to her. But then she saw the stage, and her fear faded just a little. She signed in at the table. The woman at the desk asked for the name of her piece. She smiled and said, quietly, "It doesn't have a name yet." The woman wrote "Untitled" and gave her a small badge. Now there was nothing left to do. But wait, she found a quiet chair in the corner. Her fingers tapped gently on her legs, replaying the tune in her mind. She didn't have fancy clothes or expensive shoes, but she had something no one else did: her story.
Hidden inside her music.
And when her name was called, she stood up slowly. Her heart pounded, her hands were shaking, but her feet moved forward, because no matter what happened next, whether the crowd clapped or stayed silent, she had already done the hardest part. She had shown up. Her name echoed through the hall. She heard it clearly, but for a second, she couldn't move. Her legs felt heavy and her hands were already starting to sweat. A voice inside whispered, "You can still walk away." But another voice, stronger this time, said, "You've come this far. Go." She stood up slowly, smoothed out her dress, and made her way to the stage. The walk felt longer than it really was. A few people looked at her as she passed, some curious, some distracted. No one knew who she was. She climbed the steps and stood beside the piano. It was a full-size grand piano, shiny and perfect. Nothing like the chipped, dusty one in the diner or the old keyboard in her room. She stared at it for a second, then took a deep breath and sat down on the bench. The hall was quiet now. The audience waited. She closed her eyes, placed her fingers on the keys, and began to play. At first, her hands were stiff. The nerves showed in the way her fingers moved. But with each note, her breathing calmed. She focused only on the music. The outside world faded. The rows of chairs, the bright lights, the faces staring, all of it disappeared. She wasn't playing for anyone else. She was playing for herself. Her melody began softly, almost like a whisper. It told a story without using any words. A story of long nights, quiet tears, tired smiles, and silent dreams. A story of someone who was always in the background, never seen, never heard, but who had something real inside. As the music rose, it grew stronger. Her fingers moved faster now, more sure of themselves. The song built up emotion, like waves coming in. And when the high notes came, they weren't loud to impress. They were filled with feeling, raw, honest, unfiltered. She didn't need anyone's approval. This was her truth. When she reached the final part of her piece, the notes softened again. The music slowed down, like a memory fading. Her fingers floated over the last keys with care, as if she was saying goodbye to a part of herself. Then, silence. She didn't move right away. She sat there, head slightly down, breathing slow and deep. Her heart was still pounding, but it was different now, lighter. Freer. She had done it. For a few long seconds, no one made a sound. The room was completely still, not because the music was bad, but because it had reached something inside them they didn't expect. Then, slowly, the applause began. At first, just a few people clapped. Then more joined in. Then came a wave of claps that grew louder and louder until it became a standing ovation. People rose to their feet. Some smiled. Some looked surprised. Others simply clapped with quiet respect. She stood up from the piano and looked out at the crowd, still unsure how to take it all in. She had spent years hiding this part of herself, years thinking no one would care about her music, thinking she was just the girl with the coffee pot and tired shoes. But not today. Today she was someone else. Or maybe she had always been this person and just needed one moment to finally show it as she walked off the stage. Someone in the front row leaned toward another and whispered, "Where did she come from?" She didn't hear it. She didn't need to. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen, and that feeling, more than the applause or the spotlight, was the true reward. She walked backstage slowly, still a little lost in the moment. Her hands were cold, but her chest felt warm. She had played her heart out, and for the first time, people had truly listened. As she reached the hallway behind the stage, one of the event volunteers stopped her. "Someone's asking for you," they said with a smile. She was confused. "For me?" The volunteer nodded. "Yes, a few people actually." She peeked out from behind the curtain and saw a small group near the front row. Some were talking with each other, others looking around as if waiting for someone to come out. She took a deep breath and stepped forward. One of the men approached her. First, he had a badge around his neck and a notebook in his hand. "Was your original piece, wasn't it?" he asked. She nodded quietly. He smiled. "It was brilliant. Real. You didn't just play music. You told a story." She wasn't sure what to say. She wasn't used to compliments, especially from strangers. Another woman came forward, someone who had been sitting near the back. She looked emotional, almost like she had cried a little. "Your song reminded me of something I had forgotten," she said softly. "Thank you for that." People didn't just clap and leave. They stayed. They wanted to know who she was, where she learned to play, why she hadn't performed before. She answered their questions the best she could, still overwhelmed. She didn't have a music degree or any training. It's just years of playing alone in the quiet when no one was watching. One person handed her a card. He ran a small local studio and said, "If you ever want to record that piece, call me." She took it in her hand and stared at it for a long second. It felt strange and new, like a door had opened. After things calmed down, she stepped outside for some air. The evening breeze touched her face, and for a while, she just stood there under the streetlights, watching people leave the building, laughing and talking, and then, like a scene from a dream, she saw someone walking toward her. It was the old man from the diner. He wore the same coat, walked with the same steady steps. When he reached her, he gave a small smile. "I knew you would do it," he said simply. She smiled back, trying not to tear up. "You were right," she whispered. "I didn't need to be perfect. I just needed to be honest." He nodded, eyes kind. "That's what real music is." They stood there in silence for a moment. Two strangers connected by something deeper than words. Before he left, he said, "People heard you today. Really heard you. Don't stop now." She promised she wouldn't. That night, as she walked home, her heart felt light. Not because she had impressed anyone, but because she had finally shared the D of herself she had kept hidden for so long. Keyboard sat quietly in the corner of her apartment when she entered, just as it always did. She touched its keys softly, like greeting an old friend. And then, without thinking, she began to play, not to practice, not to prepare, but just to feel. And for the first time, she didn't feel like just a waitress. She felt like an artist. The next morning felt different. The sunlight came through the window like it always did. And the streets below made the same quiet noise, but something inside her had changed. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she was just waking up to go to work. She felt like she had a reason to smile. It came from somewhere deeper than routine. At the diner, things were the same, but also not. The regular customers were there, ordering their usual meals. The cook grumbled about the slow toaster like always. But the way people looked at her had shifted, just a little. A few had seen a short video clip from the music festival recorded by someone in the audience. It had started to spread online. It's not viral, but enough that a few familiar faces in town had recognized her. "Was that really you playing at the event?" one woman asked at the counter. She nodded shyly. "You were amazing," the woman said. Smiling, "We never knew." More customers started to notice it. Some said kind words. Others just looked at her differently, like they were seeing her properly for the first time. Even the piano in the corner of the diner, once ignored and dusty, began to attract attention. One afternoon, the manager came over to her and said, "If you want to play during quiet hours, you're welcome to." She paused, surprised, then smiled and nodded. "Maybe I will." That evening, after the lunch crowd left and the place was calm, she walked over to the piano. She sat down, not to prove anything, but simply because it felt right. She played a soft melody, gentle and warm. People turned their heads. Some stopped eating. Others smiled quietly. No one laughed this time. No one whispered. Instead, the room just listened. Over the next few weeks, life kept moving forward. She still worked her shifts, still cleaned tables and carried trays. But the music festival had opened a small door in her life. The man who had given her the studio card followed up. He wasn't promising fame or money, but he offered her a chance to record her piece. Professionally, she agreed. It was her first time in a real studio. Headphones on, fingers on the polished piano keys, surrounded by walls designed to hold sound. Like a secret. She recorded the piece in just a few takes. The track was shared on a local radio station and uploaded online. More messages began to come in, people asking if she had more music, she would perform again, if they could hear her story. She didn't chase attention, but it found her in small, beautiful ways. She started writing new music. She gave her first piece a name, The Quiet Voice. It felt right, because that's what she had been, all along, quiet, steady, waiting for her moment to be heard. And though she was now slowly stepping into a new world, she never left behind who she was. She still worked at the diner. Not because she had to, but because it grounded her. Because it reminded her of where her music had come from. It had come from long hours, from unnoticed days, from tired feet and whispered dreams. Now, when people looked at her, they didn't just see a waitress. They saw a musician, storyteller, someone who turned silence into something beautiful. And whenever someone asked how it all began, she simply said, "It started with a song I used to play when no one was listening,